I almost lost my footing there, George called over his shoulder. You sure the entrance is close? Tony snapped out of his thoughts and hurried to catch up. Yeah, we came up from the west. That's where old Bill said it would be. And how long ago did he kick the bucket? It's not that I don't trust you, but I never met the guy. What if he was just rambling like always? Then this'll be a short trip. Tony stopped beside George and clapped him on the back. He was an old-school caver, with years of experience. I trust him even from beyond the grave. The two continued to clamber up the rocky, pine-covered hillside. There was no trail, and as far as Tony knew, nobody had been up here since old Bill had explored Big Box Cavern 20 years earlier. The stubborn goat had clung to this secret place until his dying day, when he revealed its location to Tony. Big as the hill itself, the old man had gasped. A single room, so large your lamp won't shine on the opposite wall, and deep. But don't go there. That place is cursed. The cave has haunted me ever since. Even now, I see shadows lurking in the corners of this room. The same shadows I saw back then. They'll take me there when I'm gone. That's the cost of my curiosity. He was a regular at the VFW hall in their small mountain town. Tony was fascinated by his caving stories, but none of them intrigued him more than the final cave, the last descent old Bill ever made. Tony had intended to make this trip alone, but George had insisted, even after hearing old Bill's warning. George was a realist. He believed in the truth of his eyes, and no tall tale was going to scare him off. Tony wished he could be so clear-headed, but with the diagnosis dangling high above his thoughts, a part of him longed for there to be some magic left in the world. George didn't know that this would likely be their final trip together. Pushing through the low thicket of branches, the pair saw above them the sheer cliff which marked the entrance to Big Box Cavern. It was just as old Bill had described, a massive stone wall, so smooth it looked handmade. The hard rock was buried by the soil of the hill, only exposed in this ditch where the thick dirt had eroded over centuries. They would need to climb 80 feet up the sloped soil on the side to reach the area above the wall. It was there that they would find the entrance. George walked forward and placed his palm on the dark stone. Oh, it's cold, he laughed. Not sure what I was expecting. It's not limestone. Come on. Tony headed for the embankment beside it. We can use the tree roots to help us climb. Hand over hand, they tugged their way. The higher they got, the steeper it became. They only paused once near the summit to catch their breath behind a tree which stood upright despite the awkward angle of the hill. It was in this brief, gasping moment that they shared a look. When they stood at last on the top of the stone wall, they gazed off into a misty morning horizon. Low fog mingled in the valleys between rolling hills, a vast sea of piney green which isolated them from the rest of the world. Behind the two was a 50-foot stretch of flat stone. Far off at the end of this smooth scar was a darkened crevasse, the entrance to Big Box Cavern. Oh, smells awful. George sniffed the air as they stood above the chasm. Maybe old Bill's curse is sulfur dioxide poisoning. Tony took a step closer, pulled out his flashlight and aimed it down into the darkness. The first ledge is pretty far down. My light can't reach it. Maybe an animal fell in and died? The two shared a grimace, then nodded in solemn agreement. Surveying the edge, they found an iron anchor which old Bill had hammered into the stone. After securing their rigs and giving them a strong tug for safety, they tiptoed closer to the abyss. Ever the eager explorer, George took the first plunge. As he descended, the light from his headlamp could have been a matchstick for all the good it did against the massive expanse of total darkness. George was relieved to learn that the other details of Bill's story were true as well, and his feet touched a solid shelf 90 feet down. Less reassuring was the sight that accompanied it. When Tony arrived a few minutes later, he found George gazing vacantly off into the hazy black. All around him, and stacked about 7 feet high, was a mass of bones in varying states of decay. This wasn't just a single animal. It was hundreds, horns and hooves, antlers and tufts of fur. The mound of hapless creatures stared in every direction with a multitude of empty sockets.
Stay here.
Their jawbones seemed to rattle.
Rest in the pit, forgotten. Join us.
Tony pulled himself away. We've got another 210 feet to go before we hit the bottom. George spoke as Tony reached his side. One more shelf, then we can actually get to exploring. Tony found the next anchor and started prepping. The animals. Do you really think they all fell down here by accident? He spoke without turning to look at them. I've seen a few sinkholes with bones, but nothing like this. Me neither. Still want to keep going? As Tony finished, he tossed a coil of rope over the edge. George pushed in and secured himself. Without a word, he began the next descent. Tony lingered for just a moment, but the prickles on the back of his neck, the feeling of the animal eyes sent him fleeing downward. The second shelf was empty, a flat stone surface rimmed with stalagmites formed by the acidic water dripping down from the carrion-covered platform above. The floor of the cavern rested in darkness, 100 feet below. Did you see him? George asked as Tony searched for an anchor among the formations. See what? These shelves. They're man-made. Tony stopped and turned to face him. I looked up while I was descending, and I saw corbels underneath. Come on, corbels, what even is that? Carved stone, inserted into the wall for support. They were decorated and everything. That's not possible. No way people built anything like that here. See for yourself. This time, Tony descended first. Below the shelf were several cave formations, some creating long, fin-like curtains. He was ready to ride off George's corbels when he spotted a peculiar corner. It was perfectly square, and indeed there seemed to be leafy vines carved in relief on the side. What did I tell you? George yelled excitedly. It's just an optical illusion. I trust my eyes. A faint sound reached his ears. It was flowing water. The rush grew louder as he set foot on the final floor. There was an underground river somewhere nearby. He scanned the darkness with his headlamp, and there was nothing but flat stone stretching into the distance. More stalagmites had grown tall along the outer walls, while some zigzagged across the floor in random patterns below places where the ceiling had cracked and begun to leak. George's heavy boot stomps echoed across the expanse as he sat down beside Tony. Where to next? George puffed out his chest and smiled. Well, this is where old Bill always ended the story. He would go kind of quiet, then jump straight into his warnings. Then I guess we'll be the first to go further in. The two decided to follow the sound of flowing water to its source. They dared not stray far from the outer wall. The cavern was so huge that leaving it behind meant eventually being entirely surrounded by open darkness. At last they came upon a flowing channel in the floor. There was no denying it was hand-carved. The shape was too precise, roughly 10 feet wide and square. It ran from the center of the large room to a deep pit in the wall where the liquid fell over the edge and disappeared into the depths. Is that... Tony backed away slowly. Iron runoff, maybe? George leaned in closer. It's so red. What would even cause that? He got on his knees and reached down to touch the crimson flow. The smell was pungent. As his fingers submerged in the thick blood, his sudden scream echoed through the cavern. Tony pulled him away, and they slid across the floor. Pointing their lamps down at his hand, they realized in horror that it was gone. Only the bloody, exposed ends of his radius and ulna remained. The entire cavern shook violently as Tony stood again. He looked to the channel where massive white carrion worms began to squirm up, creating pools of blood where they slithered. George was pale and gasping. Come on, George, we have to leave. Blood poured from George's wrist as Tony helped him to stand. Realizing they needed to close the wound, he pulled off his belt and tied it tight around his forearm. They tumbled to the wall together and stumbled back to their ropes. Shadows twisted in the hazy darkness. The rumbling in the cavern grew. When they arrived below the shelves, George collapsed against the wall and gave Tony a knowing look. "What?" Tony asked as he tugged on the line. "I'm not leaving this place, huh?" He tried to force a laugh, but the stale air turned it into a wheeze. "Your scrawny ass ain't carrying me up those ropes. I ain't doing it one-handed." "I never should have let you come here with me." Tony began to pace. "Old Bill was right about this place. I just thought, since I was gonna die anyway, What do you mean you're gonna die anyway?" Tony stood, silent. "Gotcha." George forced a smile. "I already knew."
"What?"
"About your diagnosis. Only months to live, blah, blah, blah." He looked down at his bloody wrist. "Beat you to it."
"How can you be joking around right now?"
Now I wanted to come on this trip with you, to prove to you that there was nothing to be afraid of. Now you are gonna climb those ropes and go die somewhere nice." Tony knelt and squeezed George's hand as tears flowed down their cheeks. "Get on out of here. I won't be satisfied till I've seen the end with my own eyes." Tony grabbed the rope and turned to George one last time. "I'm shooting you a finger. Too bad you'll never know which one it is." George's laughter echoed behind him as he ascended, hand over hand, to the fresh air above. Once outside, he scrambled for his phone, only to drop it over the cliff's edge when the ground beneath him shuddered violently. Looking back, he saw the titanic slab over the crevasse begin to slide. The top of the hill was shifting. It was a lid, and that lid of trees and ancient dirt was opening. A massive shadow rose up, eclipsing the moon high above. Tony smiled, for death was no longer his alone to bear.